She thought she married the perfect man, a billionaire, charming, respected. But behind the penthouse doors, he was building a trap. He stole her money, destroyed her phone, installed cameras everywhere. When she tried to escape, he brought her to an isolated lake house while she was 8 months pregnant. Then labor started early, and he refused to call for help. What happened next will leave you speechless. This is the true story of how one woman survived the unthinkable and brought down a monster. Stay until the end, because the twist you won't see coming. The fluorescent lights of Manhattan Memorial Hospital flickered above Claire Bennett's face as paramedics rushed her through emergency room doors. Blood stained her maternity dress. Her 7-month pregnant belly showed through torn fabric. A female paramedic squeezed her hand. "Stay with us, Claire. We're almost there." Detective Rachel Morrison jogged alongside the gurney, her badge clipping to her belt. She'd seen hundreds of domestic violence cases in her 15 years with the NYPD. This one made her stomach turn. The woman on the stretcher had defensive wounds on her arms, bruising around her throat, and fear in her eyes that went deeper than physical pain. "Ma'am, can you tell me who did this?" Rachel asked gently. Claire's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her hand instinctively covered her belly. Protecting, always protecting. Helen Martinez met them at the trauma bay entrance, her expression grim. "Get her to ultrasound immediately. I need fetal heart tones now." As they wheeled Claire away, Rachel noticed something clutched in the woman's other hand, a photograph. She carefully pried it loose. The image showed a smiling couple at what looked like a charity gala. The woman was Claire, glowing and radiant. The man beside her wore an expensive suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Rachel flipped the photo over. Written in elegant script, "Brandon and Claire Hartley, the perfect couple, Manhattan Elite magazine, 3 months ago." She pulled out her phone and took a picture of the photograph. Something about the man's eyes bothered her. She'd learned to trust her instincts. 3 months earlier, that same photograph had been taken at the Waldorf Astoria. Claire Bennett had stood in a designer gown, her hand resting on her barely visible baby bump. Brandon Hartley, real estate mogul and heir to the Hartley Properties empire, had wrapped his arm around her waist possessively. "Smile for the camera, darling," he'd whispered in her ear. To anyone watching, it looked like an affectionate husband. Claire knew better. His fingers dug into her ribs just hard enough to hurt. But that night, she'd still believed things could get better. She'd believed the violence was temporary. She'd believed love could fix him. She'd been wrong about everything. The morning it all started to unravel. Claire had been ordering nursery furniture online. They lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, the kind of apartment that appeared in luxury real estate magazines. Everything was white and glass and cold perfection. Brandon had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. Claire needed to check their joint account before making the purchase. She clicked on the browser. An email thread filled the screen. The messages were from someone named V. Claire's hand trembled as she scrolled through months of correspondence. The words blurred together. Intimate details, hotel room numbers, explicit photographs. Her husband was having an affair. Claire's breathing became shallow. She clicked on another folder. Bank statements. Brandon had been transferring money out of their joint accounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moving to offshore accounts she'd never heard of. Another folder. Legal documents. She opened the prenup they'd signed before marriage, but this version looked different from what she remembered. Clauses about infidelity had been removed. Property rights had been altered. Her hands shook as she realized what she was reading. The prenup had been falsified. She had no legal claim to anything. Not the apartment, not the vacation home in the Hamptons, not even the car she drove. Brandon had systematically trapped her. The front door opened. Claire slammed the laptop shut, her heart pounding. "Honey, I'm home," Brandon called out. His voice was smooth, charming. The same voice that had convinced her to quit her marketing job after they got married. "You should focus on the baby," he'd said. "I'll take care of everything." Now she understood. He'd been isolating her all along. Claire tried to act normal through dinner. Brandon talked about a new development project in Brooklyn. His hands gestured enthusiastically as he described glass towers and waterfront views. He looked happy. Successful. Nothing like a man who was systematically destroying his wife's life. She waited until he went to shower before pulling out her phone. Her best friend Amy Thompson answered on the second ring. Claire, what's wrong? You sound weird. Can you talk? Claire whispered, moving to the bedroom farthest from the bathroom. Always, what happened? The words tumbled out. The emails, the bank accounts, the falsified prenup. Amy listened in silence until Claire finished. Oh my God, Claire, you need to leave. Tonight. I can't just leave. I'm 7 months pregnant. Where would I go? To my place. We'll figure out the rest later. But Claire, listen to me. This man is dangerous. If he's been planning this for months, maybe years, he's not going to let you walk away easily. Claire heard the shower turn off. I have to go. I'll call you tomorrow. She hung up and shoved the phone under her pillow just as Brandon entered the room. He wore only a towel, water droplets still clinging to his chest. He'd been handsome once. Now Claire only saw the coldness in his gray eyes. Who were you talking to, Key? He asked casually. No one, just looking at baby names. He moved closer, studying her face. You're a terrible liar. Claire, her stomach dropped. What? I saw the laptop history. You found the emails. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Claire stood up, backing toward the door. You've been cheating on me? Stealing from me? That prenup was fake. The prenup was very real. I just made some modifications before you signed it. You were so in love. You didn't even read it carefully. He sat on the bed, completely relaxed. And yes, I've been seeing Veronica Sterling. She's my corporate lawyer. Beautiful, ambitious, and not constantly complaining about swollen ankles. The cruelty in his voice cut deeper than any physical blow. Why did you even marry me? Claire's voice cracked. Because I needed a respectable wife for my image. The eligible bachelor act was getting old. Investors like family men. You were perfect. Pretty enough, but not threatening. Sweet, obedient. He stood up, moving toward her. You played your role beautifully. I'm leaving, Claire said, trying to sound braver than she felt. No, you're not. You can't stop me. Brandon's expression changed. The mask of civility dropped. What remained was something dark and dangerous. Can't I? He grabbed her arm before she could reach the door. Claire struggled, but he was stronger. He shoved her against the wall. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Let me make something very clear, he said, his face inches from hers. You're not going anywhere. You're going to stay here. Keep your mouth shut and have my baby. After that, we'll get divorced quietly. You'll get enough money to disappear. But if you try to expose me or cause problems, I'll destroy you. I'll make sure no one believes a word you say. He released her suddenly. Claire slid down the wall, cramping shooting through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her belly. Don't be so dramatic, Brandon said, stepping over her. The baby's fine. He left her there on the bedroom floor. Claire heard him making a phone call in the living room, laughing about something, as if nothing had happened. The cramping intensified. Claire managed to crawl to her phone and texted Amy with shaking hands. Help! Need hospital! 20 minutes later, Amy burst through the apartment door using the emergency key Claire had given her years ago. She found her friend curled on the bathroom floor. Oh God, Claire. At the hospital, Dr. Martinez examined Claire thoroughly. The cramping had stopped, but the doctor's expression remained serious. The baby's heartbeat is strong, Dr. Martinez said carefully. But Claire, I'm seeing signs that concern me. Older bruising on your ribs, finger marks on your arms. You're at high risk for complications if there's any more physical stress. Claire stared at the ceiling, tears sliding down her temples. I felt, Dr. Martinez had heard that excuse 1,000 times. She was a mandated reporter. She had to document this. Claire, I need you to understand something. If you're in danger, there are resources, people who can help you. I'm fine, Claire whispered, but they both knew she was lying. When Brandon arrived at the hospital an hour later, he transformed. He rushed to Claire's bedside, all concern and tenderness. He held her hand. He asked the doctor worried questions. He was the perfect husband. Amy watched from the corner, her jaw clenched. She'd seen the bruises. She knew the truth. But Claire squeezed Brandon's hand and smiled weakly. False alarm. We're okay. That night, lying in the hospital bed, Claire realized something that made her blood run cold. She tried to leave, and he'd hurt her. She tried to get help, and he'd fooled everyone. She was trapped, and her baby's life depended on her playing along. At least, that's what she thought. What Claire didn't know was that Dr. Martinez had taken detailed photographs of every bruise. She'd documented everything in Claire's medical file. She'd also quietly called a domestic violence hotline to report her concerns. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they were turning. For the next 2 weeks, Claire played the role of dutiful wife. She smiled when Brandon came home. She made dinner. She talked about baby names and nursery colors, all while secretly planning her escape. Amy had researched everything: domestic violence shelters, legal aid lawyers, restraining order procedures. They communicated through a burner phone Amy had bought, hidden inside a tampon box in the bathroom. Brandon would never look there. "You need to leave while he's at work," Amy texted. "Pack light, just documents and essentials." Claire had been withdrawing $20 here and there from grocery money. She had almost $300 cash hidden in an old makeup compact. It wasn't much, but it was something. The plan was set for Thursday. Brandon had a meeting in Boston. He'd be gone for 8 hours minimum. Claire would pack, take a cab to Amy's apartment in Queens, and never look back. Wednesday night, Claire barely slept. She lay next to Brandon, listening to him breathe, counting down the hours until freedom. Thursday morning arrived bright and cold. Brandon kissed her forehead before leaving. "I'll be back late. Don't wait up." Claire waited 30 minutes after he left, watching from the window to make sure his car actually departed. Then she moved fast. She pulled a suitcase from the closet and started packing. Important documents first: birth certificate, social security card, medical records, then clothes. Not everything, just enough for a few weeks. She'd figure out the rest later. Her hands shook as she grabbed the hidden cash. Almost there, almost free. The front door opened. Claire froze. Brandon stood in the entrance, still wearing his coat. His expression was cold and knowing. "Going somewhere?" "I thought you left for Boston?" Her voice came out strangled. "I did. I made it to the lobby before I checked the security camera feed on my phone." He held up his cell. The screen showed a live view of their bedroom. Claire's suitcase sat open on the bed. "Did you really think I wouldn't be watching?" He'd installed cameras everywhere. Claire felt sick. "Brandon, please. I just need some space, the pregnancy, the stress. I thought maybe I could stay with Amy for a few days." "Without telling me, with all your documents and money." He moved closer. "You're lying again." "I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking clearly." "No, you weren't." His hand shot out and grabbed her throat. Not hard enough to choke, but enough to terrify. "Here's what's going to happen. You're actually going to call Amy and tell her you're fine, that we worked things out. You're going to convince her to stop interfering in our marriage." Claire nodded frantically. He released her throat and handed her his phone. Amy's number was already pulled up. "Put it on speaker," he commanded. Amy answered immediately. "Claire, are you okay? You were supposed to be here an hour ago." Brandon's hand tightened on Claire's shoulder. A warning. "Hey, Amy, I'm fine. Brandon and I talked things through last night. We're going to couples therapy. I'm sorry I worried you." Silence on the other end. Then Claire, "If you're in danger, say the word definitely." Brandon's eyes narrowed. Claire's mind raced. "I'm definitely going to be fine," she said carefully. "I'm calling the police." "No." Claire's voice rose in panic. Real panic. "Please don't. I'm okay. I promise. I just need some time to work on my marriage. Can you respect that?" Another long pause. "If you need me, I'm here. Always." "I know. Thank you." Brandon ended the call. Then he smashed Claire's phone against the kitchen counter. The screen shattered into spiderweb cracks. "You won't be needing that anymore." He gathered her documents from the suitcase and locked them in his study safe. He took her time, her credit cards, her driver's license, her keys to the car. "You're not a prisoner," he said calmly. "You're my wife, and you're going to act like it." That night, Brandon slept peacefully. Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the baby move inside her. She tried to find comfort in those small kicks. At least her daughter was still safe, still protected. But for how long the next morning? Claire discovered the full extent of her captivity. The apartment door required a key code to exit. Brandon had changed it. The windows didn't open. The landline phone was gone. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. Brandon went to work as usual, but he called every 2 hours to check on her. "What are you doing right now? Send me a photo." Claire complied. She had no choice. He also sent her a video, security footage from inside their home, multiple cameras in every room except the bathrooms. He'd been watching her for months. Every conversation with Amy, every moment she thought she was alone. He'd seen it all. "I take care of what's mine." His text message read, "Remember that?" Amy tried calling the landline at work, but Brandon had blocked her number. She tried showing up at the building, but the doorman had new instructions. "Mr. Hartley said his wife isn't receiving visitors. She's on bed rest." Amy stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the penthouse windows, feeling helpless. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? That her friend sounded weird on the phone? That she had a bad feeling? She needed proof. Something concrete. So Amy did the only thing she could think of. She started documenting everything. Every suspicious interaction, every canceled plan, every time Claire missed their weekly coffee date. She created a timeline, saved text messages, and kept detailed notes. If something happened to Claire, at least there would be a record. 2 weeks passed in a blur of isolation and fear. Claire moved through the apartment like a ghost, trying to stay invisible. Brandon's moods were unpredictable. Sometimes he was almost kind, bringing home takeout from her favorite restaurant. Other times he was cruel, criticizing everything from her appearance to the way she walked. "You're getting fat," he said one evening, looking at her pregnant belly with disgust. "I'm 7 months pregnant." "It's unattractive. Veronica keeps herself fit." The mention of his mistress had become casual, normalized, as if infidelity was just another aspect of their marriage. On Wednesday afternoon, Brandon came home early with a visitor. Claire heard voices in the entryway and emerged from the bedroom cautiously. A woman stood in the living room. She was tall, blonde, and beautiful in the way magazine covers demanded. Designer suit, perfect makeup, cold eyes that assessed Claire like a specimen under glass. "Claire, meet Veronica Sterling," Brandon said cheerfully. "My business partner." Veronica extended a manicured hand. "So you're the wife. How lovely to finally meet you." Claire's hands remained at her shoes. "Get out of my home." "Actually, it's Brandon's home," Veronica corrected. "According to the prenup you signed, but I understand pregnancy makes women emotional." Brandon laughed. Actually laughed. Claire felt something inside her break. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Because I can," Brandon replied simply. "And because I want you to understand your place. You're here because I allow it. When the baby comes, you'll serve your purpose. After that," he shrugged. "We'll see." Veronica settled onto the couch as if she owned it. "Brandon tells me you're due in 8 weeks. How exciting. I've always thought children were such a commitment." The implication was clear. Veronica had no intention of mothering Claire's child. She wanted Brandon, the lifestyle, and the money. The baby was just an inconvenience. Claire's hand went protectively to her belly. Her daughter kicked strongly, as if sensing her mother's distress. "I think I need to lie down," Claire said quietly. "Good idea, Mite." Brandon agreed. "Why don't you rest while Veronica and I discuss business?" As Claire retreated to the bedroom, she heard them laughing together. The sound echoed through the apartment like mockery. She crawled into bed and pulled the covers over her head. This was a nightmare. A waking nightmare she couldn't escape. But then she felt it again. A strong kick from her daughter. A reminder that she wasn't alone. That she had to stay strong for both of them. Claire emerged an hour later to find them gone. A note on the counter read, "Dinner meeting, don't wait up. Brandon?" For the first time in weeks, Claire was alone. Truly alone, but sure. She searched the apartment methodically. Brandon had been careless in his confidence. His laptop sat on the dining table, still open, still logged in. Claire's hands trembled as she opened his email. She couldn't send messages. His phone was required for two-factor authentication, but she could read. And what she read made her blood run cold. Brandon and Veronica weren't just having an affair. They were planning something bigger. Email threads discussed life insurance policies, accidental death benefits, How tragic it would be if something happened to Claire during childbirth. Complications happen. One email from Veronica read, especially with high-risk pregnancies, no one would question it. They were going to kill her. Claire's breath came in short gasps. She forwarded several emails to a draft folder, hoping she could access them later somehow. Then she cleared the browser history and stepped away from the computer. Her mind raced. She needed help. Real help. But how? She had no phone. No way to reach the outside world. The apartment was her prison. She went to the window and looked down at the street 20 floors below. People walked by, living normal lives, completely unaware that a woman stood trapped above them. Claire pressed her hand against the glass. It was cold and unyielding, like everything else in her life had become. That night, Brandon returned home drunk. He stumbled through the door at 2 in the morning, reeking of alcohol and perfume, Veronica's perfume. He stood in the bedroom doorway, swaying slightly. "You know what your problem is," he slurred. "You're weak. You've always been weak. That's why this was so easy." Claire pretended to be asleep, but he wasn't fooled. "I know you're awake. I can see your breathing change." He moved closer. "Want to know a secret? I never loved you. Not even in the beginning. You were just a means to an end. The perfect accessory." A single tear slid down Claire's cheek. She kept her eyes closed. "After the baby comes, you'll have an accident. Postpartum depression. So tragic. Veronica will comfort me. We'll marry quietly. No one will question it." He laughed, the sound bitter and cruel. "You'll just be a sad story I tell at dinner parties." He finally passed out on the couch. Claire lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to him snore. Her daughter kicked and rolled inside her, blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding them both. Claire made a decision in that moment. She would survive this. She would protect her baby. And somehow, some way, she would make sure Brandon Hartley faced justice for everything he'd done. She just had to stay alive long enough to see it happen. Dr. Martinez frowned at Claire's chart during the routine checkup the following week. Brandon sat beside his wife, playing the concerned husband role perfectly. But the doctor had been doing this job for 23 years. She knew the signs. "Claire, your blood pressure is dangerously high. You've lost weight instead of gaining it. These are serious red flags." She looked directly at Brandon. "I'm concerned about the stress levels in the home environment." "We're doing everything right," Brandon assured her smoothly. "Claire's just anxious about becoming a mother. First-time jitters." Martinez turned to Claire. "Is there anything you want to tell me? Anything at all?" Brandon's hand found Claire's knee under the examination table. His fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. A silent warning. "No," Claire whispered. "I'm just tired." The doctor studied her for a long moment, then made a note in the file. "I'm putting you on modified bed rest, and I want to see you weekly from now on, not bi-weekly." As they left the medical building, Brandon's pleasant facade dropped. "You almost said something in there." "I didn't. You wanted to. I could see it in your face." He unlocked the car. "One more stunt like that, and there will be consequences. Real consequences." They drove home in silence. Claire stared out the window, watching the city pass by. So many people. So much life. All of it beyond her reach. The penthouse felt smaller every day, more suffocating. Claire spent her afternoons lying on the couch, feeling her daughter move, wondering if they'd ever be free. On Thursday morning, the building intercom buzzed. Brandon had already left for work. Claire moved to the speaker, carefully. "Ms. Bennett, there's a William Bennett here to see you. Says he's your father." Claire's heart leaped. Her father. She'd been so isolated she hadn't spoken to him in weeks. Brandon had been monitoring all communication, making excuses about Claire being too tired for visitors. "Send him up," she said quickly, then panicked. The apartment was covered in cameras. Brandon would see everything. Her phone buzzed immediately. Brandon's text, "Get rid of him. You're on bed rest. Remember, too sick for visitors." Another text, "I'm watching. Don't make me come home early." The elevator dinged. William Bennett stepped into the hallway, looking exactly like Claire remembered. Tall, gray-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. 28 years with the FBI had made him observant. Claire opened the door, her smile forced and bright. "Dad?" What a surprise. William hugged her carefully, noting how thin she'd become, how her smile didn't reach her eyes. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check on my favorite daughter. I'm your only daughter. That makes you the favorite by default. He looked around the apartment. Brandon home? At work. Can I get you some water coffee? They moved to the living room. William studied his daughter carefully as she fussed with beverages. Something was wrong, very wrong, but she was clearly afraid to speak freely. How's my granddaughter doing? He asked mournfully. Good, active, she kicks constantly. And how are you doing? Gilly. Claire's hands trembled as she set down the water glasses. Fine, just tired. The pregnancy is harder than I expected. William had interrogated hundreds of suspects in his career. He knew when someone was lying. His daughter was terrified. The question was, of what or of whom? You know you can talk to me about anything. Right, father-daughter confidentiality. Claire glanced at a smoke detector in the corner. William followed her gaze and understood immediately. Surveillance. Everything's great. Dad, Brandon takes good care of me. She emphasized the word slightly. Too much. Coached. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. Weather, baby names, William's retirement hobbies, all surface-level small talk. But before he left, William hugged his daughter again and whispered in her ear, so quietly the cameras couldn't possibly pick it up. Blink twice if you need help. Claire pulled back, tears in her eyes, and blinked deliberately. Once. Twice. William's expression didn't change. Well, I should let you rest. I'll be in town for a while, staying at the Marriott near Central Park, room 307, in case you need anything. The emphasis on the room number wasn't lost on Claire. An escape route. If she could just get out of this apartment. After William left, Claire's phone exploded with messages from Brandon. What did he want? What did you tell him? He looked suspicious. Did you say something? Claire responded carefully. Just a random visit. I acted normal, like you said. He suspects nothing. Brandon's response came quickly. Good, because I've decided we need a change of scenery. We're going to the lake house this weekend, just the two of us. Peace and quiet before the baby comes. Claire's blood ran cold. The lake house was 2 hours north of the city. Isolated. No neighbors. No witnesses. She texted back, sounds nice. But nothing about this sounded nice. This sounded like an ending. That night, Claire barely slept. She kept thinking about her father's face, the concern in his eyes, the coded message about his hotel room. He knew something was wrong. He was trying to help. But would he figure it out in time? Friday morning had arrived too quickly. Brandon packed bags with disturbing efficiency. He whistled while he worked, as if they were going on a romantic getaway instead of to Claire's potential grave. It'll be good for us, he said cheerfully. Quality time before we become parents. Claire nodded mutely. Her daughter kicked hard, as if protesting, as if she knew. They loaded the car. Brandon guided Claire into the passenger seat with a hand on her elbow. Firm, controlling. The building doorman waved cheerfully as they drove away. Claire looked back at Manhattan, watching the skyline shrink in the distance. The city had been her prison. But at least in the city, there were people, witnesses. Help was theoretically possible. Where they were going, there would be nothing. Just woods and water and whatever Brandon had planned. Claire put her hand on her belly and made a silent promise to her daughter. I will protect you. No matter what it takes, we will survive this. She had no idea how she'd keep that promise, but she had to believe it was possible, because the alternative was unthinkable. The lake house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by dense forest. It had been in Brandon's family for generations. A sprawling log structure with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private lake, beautiful and completely isolated. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. Cell service was spotty. The closest town was 45 minutes by car. It was the perfect place to disappear. Brandon carried the bags inside while Claire stood on the porch, breathing in the pine-scented air. Under different circumstances, this would have been peaceful. Now it felt like a death sentence. Come inside, Brandon called. I'll start a fire. The interior was rustic luxury, leather furniture, a stone fireplace, mounted deer heads on the walls. Everything felt heavy and masculine and oppressive. Claire's phone had no signal. She checked 3 times. I told you the service is terrible up here, Brandon said, watching her. But that's the point. No distractions. Just us. He'd also brought Veronica. She arrived an hour later, pulling up in a silver Mercedes. She wore jeans and a cashmere sweater, looking effortlessly perfect even in casual clothing. Surprise, she said, kissing Brandon in front of Claire. I couldn't let you two have all the fun. Claire felt sick. I thought this was supposed to be couples time. We are a couple, Veronica replied. You're just the incubator. Brandon laughed. He was drinking already, pouring expensive scotch into crystal glasses. The alcohol loosened his tongue and darkened his mood. That night became a waking nightmare. Veronica and Brandon acted as if Claire wasn't there. They cooked dinner together. They laughed and flirted. They talked about their future plans, which clearly didn't include Claire beyond the immediate delivery of the baby. I've always wanted a daughter, Veronica mused, but pregnancy sounds terrible. All that weight gain and stretch marks. Thank God Claire's handling that part. Claire excused herself to the bathroom and vomited. The stress, the fear, the humiliation. It was too much. She splashed water on her face and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes had dark circles underneath. Her skin was pale. She looked like a ghost of herself. A contraction rippled through her abdomen. Not painful, just uncomfortable. Braxton Hicks. Probably. Practice contractions. Her doctor had said they were normal. But then another one came. And another. Claire gripped the sink, breathing through them. They were coming regularly now, every 10 minutes. This wasn't practice. This was labor. 8 weeks early. She stumbled out of the bathroom. Brandon, something's wrong. He looked up from his scotch, annoyed. What now, Bantashin? The baby. I'm having contractions. You're always having contractions. The doctor said Braxton Hicks are normal. These are different. They're regular. I think I'm in labor. Veronica rolled her eyes. God, you're dramatic. You're probably just stressed. Another contraction hit. Stronger this time. Claire gasped, doubling over. Please, I need to go to the hospital. Brandon studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. It's probably a nothing, but fine. We'll take you in the morning if it's still happening. Morning, Brandon. The baby is 8 weeks premature. If this is real labor, every minute counts. Then maybe you shouldn't have been so stressful and difficult. This is your fault. He poured another drink. Go lie down. I'm sure you'll be fine. Claire stared at him in disbelief. You're refusing to take me to the hospital. I'm saying you're overreacting, like usual. If it's real labor, it'll still be happening tomorrow. If not, you'll have wasted my time driving in the dark on mountain roads. Our baby could die. Then that's one less problem to deal with, isn't it? The words hung in the air like poison. Veronica looked momentarily uncomfortable, but she said nothing. Claire realized in that moment that Brandon genuinely didn't care if she or the baby died. This had all been leading to this: the isolation, the lake house, the refusal of medical care. He was going to let them both die and call it a tragic complication. Another contraction tore through her, stronger than before. Claire cried out, clutching her belly. Something felt wrong, not just the contractions, something else. Warmth spread between her legs. When she looked down, she saw blood. I'm bleeding, she whispered. Brandon finally looked concerned, but not for the reasons he should. Don't make a mess on the furniture. Claire stumbled toward the bathroom, leaving drops of blood on the hardwood floor. Another contraction hit. She fell against the wall, gasping. Please, she begged. Something's really wrong. Please help me. Veronica stood up, her face pale. For the first time, she looked scared. Brandon, maybe we should take her. If she dies here, there will be questions. She's not going to die. She's being hysterical. But Veronica was moving toward her phone. I'm calling 911. Brandon grabbed her wrist. You're not calling anyone. We're too far from civilization. It'll take an ambulance over an hour to get here. By then, whatever's happening will have resolved itself one way or another. You're going to let her die. Veronica's voice rose. I'm going to let nature take its course. If the pregnancy fails, it saves us trouble later. If it doesn't, we proceed as planned. He said it so casually, As if they were discussing a business transaction instead of human lives. Claire slid down the wall, the pain overwhelming now. Blood soaked through her pants. Her daughter was in distress. She could feel it. The movements had become frantic, then stopped. "My baby," she sobbed. "Please, my baby." Veronica stared at Brandon like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "You're a monster. I'm practical. There's a difference, see. I'm calling for help." Veronica pulled out her phone. Brandon slapped it out of her hand. The device skittered across the floor. "You'll do what I tell you. You're in this as deep as I am. Those emails discussing the insurance policies, you wrote half of them." Veronica's face went white. "I didn't think you'd actually—" "What, kill her? I'm not killing anyone. I'm just not going out of my way to save her. There's a difference." Claire's vision was starting to blur. She was losing too much blood. Her consciousness was fading, but she heard Veronica say something that gave her the smallest spark of hope. "I can't do this. I won't be part of a murder." Then everything went black. Veronica Sterling had made many questionable choices in her 32 years. She'd lied for clients. She'd helped hide assets in divorce cases. She'd definitely crossed ethical lines in her legal career. But watching a pregnant woman bleed out on a bathroom floor crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The moment Claire lost consciousness, Veronica made a decision. She grabbed her phone from where Brandon had knocked it, ran outside to where cell service was marginally better, and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance. A woman is in premature labor and hemorrhaging. We're at the Hartley Lake House on Mountain Ridge Road. Is the patient conscious? No, she collapsed. There's a lot of blood. Brandon appeared in the doorway, his face twisted with rage. Hang up that phone right now. The ambulance is on the way, Veronica said, her voice shaking but determined. I'm not letting her die. Brandon moved toward her. You just destroyed both our lives. No, you did. When you decided you were God, she backed away from him. The police are coming too. I can hear the sirens. And she could, faint at first, then growing louder. The emergency dispatcher had followed protocol. Domestic call with a pregnant victim meant police escort. Brandon's expression shifted from rage to calculation. This is what's going to happen. Claire is mentally unstable. She attacked herself. You witnessed it. That's the story. That's insane. That's the story, or I'll make sure you go down as an accomplice to attempted murder. Those emails. Remember, your fingerprints are all over this. Veronica hesitated. He was right. She'd written things, suggested things. She'd been complicit even if she'd never intended for it to go this far. But then she thought about Claire on that bathroom floor, about the unborn baby fighting for life, about what kind of person she wanted to be. No, she said quietly. I'm telling the truth. Brandon grabbed her arm. You stupid. The front door burst open. 2 paramedics rushed in, followed by 3 police officers. Where's the patient? The lead paramedic shouted. Bathroom, down the hall. Veronica pointed. She's pregnant, 8 weeks premature. Lots of blood. The paramedics ran. One of the police officers, a young woman with sharp eyes, looked between Brandon and Veronica. Who called this in? I did, Veronica said. I'm Veronica Sterling. That man is Brandon Hartley. The patient is his wife. Claire, he refused to get her medical help. Brandon's face went perfectly calm. That's not true, officer. My wife has been under tremendous stress. She's been having emotional episodes. We were planning to drive her to the hospital in the morning, but Ms. Sterling panicked and overreacted. The officer studied both of them. Ma'am, is that accurate? Veronica took a breath. This was it, the moment that would define who she really was. No, he's lying. He's been abusing his wife for months. He brought her here to let her die. I have proof, emails, recorded conversations. I'll give you everything. Brandon's mask finally cracked. You vindictive. Sir, I need you to step outside with me. Another officer interrupted. From the bathroom came urgent voices. We need to move her now. Possible placental abruption, fetal heart rate dropping. They wheeled Claire out on a gurney. She was unconscious, an oxygen mask over her face. Her skin looked gray, blood soaked through the sheets. Behind them came a voice that made everyone stop. That's my daughter. William Bennett stood in the doorway. He'd been driving up to check the lake house after finding Claire's location through Brandon's credit card records. His FBI instincts had screamed that something was wrong. He'd been right. "Dad," Veronica said quickly. Though William wasn't her father, she was buying time, creating confusion. "The paramedics need to leave now." William understood immediately. He stepped aside. The paramedics rushed Claire to the ambulance. William climbed in with them without asking permission. "Sir, are you family?" a paramedic asked. "I'm her father, retired FBI, and that man in there needs to be arrested." "We're just medical." "Sir, police will handle that." The ambulance screamed down the mountain road, sirens wailing. William held his daughter's hand, watching monitors beep and medical personnel work frantically. "Stay with us. Claire," the paramedic urged. "We're almost there." Behind them at the lake house, Detective Rachel Morrison had just arrived. She'd been following the case ever since Claire first appeared in her emergency room months ago. When the 911 call came through with the Hartley name, she jumped in her car immediately. She found Brandon Hartley in handcuffs, arguing with officers. Veronica Sterling sat on the porch steps, crying, and blood stained the bathroom floor. Rachel knelt next to Veronica. "Are you the one who called for help?" Veronica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I should have done it sooner. I knew what he was. I just didn't want to believe it." "Tell me everything," Rachel said gently. "From the beginning." And Veronica did. She told about the affair, the plan to let Claire die, the insurance policies, the emails, everything. By the time she finished, Rachel had enough probable cause for a dozen charges: attempted murder, domestic violence, fraud, conspiracy. Brandon Hartley was going to prison for a very long time. At Manhattan Memorial Hospital, Dr. Martinez performed an emergency cesarean section. The baby was in severe distress. Claire's placenta had partially separated. Minutes mattered. William paced the waiting room, his hands clenched. He'd faced down terrorists and crime bosses in his career without flinching. But waiting while his daughter fought for her life broke him. Amy Thompson burst through the doors an hour later, having driven like a maniac from Queens the moment she got William's call. "Is she alive?" Amy gasped. "In surgery. Both of them." William's voice cracked. "I should have done something sooner. I knew something was wrong." "You couldn't have known it was this bad." "I'm FBI. I'm trained to see these things. And I missed it with my own daughter." They sat together in silence, watching the surgical suite doors, waiting for news. Dr. Martinez finally emerged at 11 p.m., still in surgical scrubs. "The baby's alive, 4 pounds, 2 ounces, premature but fighting. We have her in NICU." "And Claire," William stood, "critical but stable. She lost a lot of blood. We had to give her multiple transfusions. The next 48 hours will tell us more." Martinez's expression softened. "But Mr. Bennett, you should know something. This wasn't just premature labor. This was the result of sustained physical trauma. I documented everything. Claire's medical records will show a pattern of abuse going back months." William's jaw clenched. "Will she testify?" "If she survives, that will be her choice. But the medical evidence speaks for itself." Detective Rachel Morrison arrived an hour later with a warrant for Brandon Hartley's hospital room visit. He'd been demanding to see his wife, playing the concerned husband for anyone who would listen. "He's not getting anywhere near her," Rachel informed the security desk. "He's under arrest. I need officers posted outside Mrs. Bennett's room 24/7. She met with William and Amy in a private conference room. I need to know everything you know about Brandon Hartley. Every detail." They talked for 3 hours. Amy provided her documentation: text messages, photos of bruises, the timeline of Claire's isolation. William added his FBI perspective, including financial records he'd pulled through old contacts. Brandon Hartley's empire was built on fraud and money laundering. "There's more," Rachel said. "Veronica Sterling is cooperating. She's provided audio recordings of Brandon discussing plans to let Claire die. She also has emails detailing insurance fraud." "Will she testify?" William asked. "Yes, in exchange for immunity. The DA is willing to deal because her testimony is devastating." The case against Brandon Hartley was building into something massive: attempted murder, multiple counts of domestic violence, fraud, forgery, insurance fraud. money laundering, each charge carrying years of prison time. But Rachel had been doing this job long enough to know that building a case and winning a conviction were two different things. They needed Claire to survive. They needed her to be strong enough to testify. And they needed a jury to believe that a wealthy, charming real estate mogul was capable of such calculated cruelty. 3 days later, Claire woke up. The hospital room was dim. Monitors beeped softly. Her body felt heavy and wrong, but she was alive. "Dad," her voice came out as a whisper. William was at her side immediately, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here. The baby. She's alive. In NICU. Fighting like her mother." Where Claire closed her eyes, relief washing over her. "Brandon. In jail. He's not going to hurt you anymore." For the first time in months, Claire felt something she'd almost forgotten. Safety. Amy visited later that day, sobbing and hugging Claire carefully. "I'm so sorry. I should have done more. I should have called the police earlier." "You tried," Claire said weakly. "He was just too good at hiding it. I documented everything." Amy pulled out her phone's bio, every canceled plan, every weird text. "I knew someday we'd need proof." Over the next week, as Claire slowly recovered, Detective Morrison visited multiple times. She explained the case carefully. The evidence, the charges, the likelihood of conviction. "We have enough to convict without your testimony," Rachel said. "The medical records, Veronica's recordings, the physical evidence, but it would be stronger with you." Claire looked at her premature daughter in the NICU isolette, so small and fragile, fighting for every breath. "I'll testify," Claire said quietly. "He took everything from me, my sense of safety, my trust, my body, but he's not taking my voice." 6 months later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Media filled the gallery. Brandon Hartley sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking every bit the successful businessman. But the prosecution was ready. Catherine Walsh, the lead prosecutor, stood before the jury. "This case is about power and control, about a man who systematically destroyed his wife's autonomy and nearly destroyed her life. You will hear testimony that will disturb you, evidence that will shock you. But I ask that you listen carefully and remember one thing. Abuse doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it wears an expensive suit and smiles for cameras." She was right. The evidence was devastating. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every day brought new revelations that made the jury visibly uncomfortable. Martinez testified first, walking the jury through Claire's medical records, X-rays showing healed fractures, photographs of bruises in various stages of healing, documentation of weight loss and elevated stress hormones. "These injuries tell a story," Dr. B. Martinez explained. "A story of sustained physical abuse over many months." The defense attorney, Garrett Mills, tried to suggest alternative explanations. "Isn't it possible Mrs. Hartley was clumsy, that she had accidents?" "No," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "The pattern of injuries is inconsistent with accidents. They're consistent with domestic violence." Amy Thompson testified next, describing Claire's personality change over the course of the marriage. "She stopped calling, stopped seeing friends. She became a shell of herself." "But you never saw Mr. Hartley hit her, did you?" Mills pressed. "No. Abusers are smart about that. They hide it." Veronica Sterling's testimony was the prosecution's nuclear weapon. She walked the jury through emails discussing insurance policies and accidents. She played audio recordings of Brandon discussing his plans. One recording made several jurors visibly upset. Brandon's voice came through clearly. "If she dies in childbirth, no one will question it. Complications happen. I'll be the grieving widower. Veronica can comfort me. Perfect plan." Veronica's voice on the recording. "What about the baby, Brandon? Babies die too. Premature birth is risky." The casual way he discussed their deaths was chilling. Multiple jurors were crying by the end of the recording. Mills tried to discredit Veronica. "You're testifying to save yourself, aren't you? You were complicit in this alleged plan." "I was," Veronica admitted then. "I did terrible things, but I drew the line at letting them die. That's the difference between me and him." William Bennett testified about the financial fraud. His FBI background gave him credibility as he walked through Brandon's shell corporations and falsified documents. Mr. Hartley created an elaborate trap for his wife. He made her financially dependent, isolated her from support systems, and systematically removed every avenue of escape. Finally, Brian, Claire took the stand. She'd gained back some of her weight. Her daughter was home now, healthy despite her premature birth. But Claire still looked fragile, haunted. Catherine Walsh approached gently. "Mrs. Bennett, can you tell the jury when the abuse started?" Claire's voice was quiet but steady. 3 months after we got married. I questioned why he was coming home so late. He slapped me, then he cried and apologized. Said it would never happen again. But it did happen again. Yes, it got worse each time. For 2 hours, Claire described her marriage, the escalating violence, the isolation, the psychological torture of having Veronica flaunt their affair, the terror of the lake house. Mills's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to paint Claire as vindictive, as someone who wanted Brandon's money, as an unreliable narrator. "Isn't it true that you signed a prenuptial agreement willingly?" "I signed a document, but it wasn't the same document I reviewed with my lawyer." He switched it. "Can you prove that?" The forensic document examiner found evidence of digital manipulation in the metadata. Mills changed tactics. "You never called the police. Why not?" "He took my phone. He controlled every aspect of my life. I was afraid he'd kill me if I tried." "But you could have told your doctor, your friend, your father." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I tried. He monitored everything. He had cameras everywhere. He made sure I couldn't speak freely." Or, Mills suggested, "you're lying now because you want revenge and money." Claire looked directly at the jury. "I don't want his money. I want him in prison where he can't hurt anyone else. That's all I've ever wanted." The closing arguments were powerful on both sides. Mills argued that the prosecution had shown abuse, yes, but not attempted murder. That Brandon's refusal to take Claire to the hospital was poor judgment, not attempted murder. Catherine Walsh's closing was devastating. The defendant didn't just refuse medical care. He brought his pregnant wife to an isolated location while she was at high risk. He dismissed clear signs of labor. He told his mistress that if Claire died, it would save them trouble. That's not poor judgment. That's attempted murder. And this jury has the power to hold him accountable. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. When they finally returned, the forewoman stood. "In the case of the state versus Brandon Hartley, on the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty." Claire gasped, William's arm around her shoulders. "On the charges of aggravated domestic violence, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. On the charges of fraud, forgery, and money laundering, we find the defendant guilty." Brandon's face remained expressionless, but his hands clenched on the defense table. Judge Thomas Crawford addressed Brandon directly. "Mr. Hartley, you used your wealth and status to trap and torture your wife. You showed no remorse, even when her life hung in the balance. This court sentences you to 25 years in state prison on the attempted murder charge, with additional consecutive sentences on the remaining counts. You will be eligible for parole after serving at least 20 years. Brandon was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look back at Claire, but she watched him go, feeling something she hadn't felt in over a year. Freedom. 1 year after the trial, Claire Bennett stood in a conference room overlooking Manhattan. The view was different from Brandon's penthouse. This building was in a quieter neighborhood. The office belonged to the Hope Foundation, a nonprofit Claire had founded to help domestic violence survivors. Mrs. Bennett, a young woman, stood in the doorway, nervous. "The support group is ready to start." Claire smiled. "I'll be right there, and please, call me Claire." The support group met every Tuesday evening. 15 women, all survivors of domestic violence, gathered in a circle. Some were newly escaped. Others were months or years into recovery. All of them were Brevin. Claire sat down with them, her daughter Hope asleep in a carrier beside her. The name had been Amy's suggestion. "After everything you survived, hope is what brought you through." "Who wants to start tonight?" Claire asked gently. A woman in her 40s raised her hand. "I left yesterday. I'm staying at a shelter. I'm terrified he'll find me." "You did the hardest thing," Claire said. The leaving is the most dangerous time, but you're not alone anymore. They went around the circle, sharing stories, offering support. No judgment, no platitudes, just raw honesty and solidarity. After the group ended, Claire walked home slowly. She lived in a modest apartment now in Brooklyn, far from the gilded cage of Brandon's penthouse. The space was smaller, but it was hers. Every piece of furniture, every dish in the cabinet, everything chosen by her, paid for by her work. William visited 3 times a week, completely enchanted by his granddaughter. "She has your determination," he'd say, watching Hope grip his finger with surprising strength. Amy came by even more often, having become Hope's unofficial godmother. "I'm making up for lost time," she insisted. Dr. Martinez had become a friend and medical advisor to the foundation. "You are helping more women than you know," she told Claire. "Your story gave them permission to speak up." Even Veronica Sterling had found a kind of redemption. She'd surrendered her law license and now worked as an advocate, using her legal knowledge to help survivors navigate the court system. "I can't undo what I did," she told Claire during one of their awkward but necessary conversations, "but I can try to do better going forward." Claire had learned something important in her recovery. Healing wasn't linear. Some days were good, other days, a sound or smell would trigger a panic attack. Therapy helped, support groups helped, time helped, but she would always carry scars. The difference was, she'd stopped being ashamed of them. On the anniversary of the verdict, Claire agreed to speak at a domestic violence awareness conference. Standing before 300 people felt terrifying, but she'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite it. "My name is Claire Bennett," she began, "and I'm a survivor." She told her story, not all of it. She didn't know anyone every painful detail, but she shared enough to help others recognize the warning signs. The isolation, the gaslighting, the escalating control. "I thought I needed to be perfect to deserve help," Claire said. "I thought if I was just better, quieter, more obedient, the abuse would stop. But abuse is never the victim's fault. Ever." She paused, looking out at the audience. Some were nodding, some were crying. Some looked like they were hearing their own stories reflected back at them. "The system isn't perfect," Claire continued. "I was lucky. I had a father with FBI connections. I had a best friend who documented everything. I had a prosecutor who believed me. Not every survivor has those advantages. That's why we need to do better as a society. We need to believe women when they say they're in danger. We need to make resources accessible. We need to hold abusers accountable." After the speech, woman after woman approached her, sharing their stories, asking for advice, thanking her for speaking up. One young woman, barely 20, whispered, "My boyfriend does some of the things you described. I thought it was normal. I thought it was love." Claire took her hands gently. "Love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't control. Love doesn't isolate. What you're describing isn't love." She gave the woman information about resources, shelter numbers, legal aid, safety planning. The woman left with tears in her eyes, but something new in her expression. Recognition, understanding, the first spark of determination. That night, tucking Hope into her crib, Claire thought about how far she'd come, from a woman trapped in a penthouse prison to someone helping others find freedom. The journey had been brutal. She wouldn't wish it on anyone, but she'd survived. More than that, she'd rebuilt herself into something stronger. Hope stirred, making small sleeping sounds. Claire smoothed her daughter's soft hair and whispered the same promise she made every night. "You'll grow up knowing your worth. No one will ever make you feel small. I'll make sure of it." Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "Thank you for your speech today. I left. I'm safe. You saved my life." Claire smiled through tears. This was why she did it, why she kept speaking up despite the difficulty. Every woman who found the courage to leave was a victory against the Brandon Hartleys of the world. William knocked softly on the apartment door, letting himself in with his key. "How'd the speech go?" "Good, hard, but good. I'm proud of you." He hugged his daughter carefully. "Your mother would be too." They sat together in the small living room, drinking tea, watching Hope sleep, comfortable silence between them. the kind of peace that comes after surviving storms. Do you ever wonder if you'll fully heal? William asked quietly. Claire considered the question. I think healing isn't about going back to who I was before. That person is gone. This is about becoming someone new. Someone who knows her strength because she's tested it. That's wise. Therapy is expensive, but worth it, Claire joked. They laughed softly. And in that moment, in that small Brooklyn apartment with its second-hand furniture and cheerful yellow walls, Claire felt something she never had in Brandon's penthouse. She felt home. Brandon Hartley sat in his prison cell, staring at gray walls. He'd been denied parole at his first hearing, would likely be denied for many more. His empire had crumbled, his reputation destroyed. His name was synonymous with abuse. Sometimes he still couldn't believe it had all fallen apart. He'd been so careful, so controlling. How had he lost? The answer was simple. Though he'd never admit it, he'd underestimated Claire. He'd thought she was weak, broken, controllable. He'd been wrong. 5 years later, Hope Bennett celebrated her 6th birthday at a park in Brooklyn. She was a bright, confident child who loved dinosaurs and soccer. She had her mother's determination and her grandfather's sharp mind. She had no memory of the man whose DNA she shared. Claire had decided that Hope would know the truth when she was older, but for now, she was just a little girl eating cake and chasing her friends. Claire watched her daughter play, feeling gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for survival, for support, for second chance. Amy sat beside her, pregnant with her first child. You think our kids will be friends? I think they won't have a choice. We're too attached. They laughed around them. The Hope Foundation had grown. What started as a small support group now operated 3 domestic violence shelters, a legal aid clinic, and an emergency hotline. Claire had turned her trauma into purpose. Not everyone gets that opportunity. She knew she was lucky in that regard. As the sun set over Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Claire Bennett felt something profound. Not happiness exactly. Happiness seemed too simple a word for the complexity of emotions she carried. But peace, yes, peace, hard-won and precious. She'd survived the unthinkable. She'd rebuilt her life from nothing. She'd turned pain into power. And most importantly, she'd learned the lesson she now taught others. Your past doesn't define you. Your scars don't weaken you. Survival is a testament to your strength, not your brokenness. As Hope ran over, breathless and excited, Claire scooped her daughter into her arms. This was what Brandon had tried to destroy. This love, this joy, this future to all. He'd failed. And in that failure, Claire had found her triumph. Not revenge, not wealth, but something infinitely more valuable. She'd found herself. Claire's story reminds us that survival takes incredible courage, but speaking up takes even more. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling us what shocked you most. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. And subscribe, because every week we bring you stories of resilience, justice, and hope that prove the human spirit can't be broken. Remember, your voice matters. Use it. See you in the next story.